He told me I should watch the wedding online instead. He said it casually, like he was suggesting a live stream of a concert or a football match, not the wedding of the woman he was about to marry, not the ceremony I had paid for, planned, hosted, protected, and quietly salvaged more times than anyone will ever know. I remember the exact tone of his voice. Polite, firm, rehearsed. The kind of tone men use when they think they're being reasonable, but are really just drawing a line they believe you're too small or too embarrassed to cross. I wished him luck and ended the call. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I had done wrong or beg for a seat in the back. I simply said, "Good luck," and I hung up. That's the part people don't understand later. They think the story starts the next morning when his phone started ringing from numbers he couldn't afford to ignore. But the story really started decades earlier, when I learned that silence, used correctly, can sound louder than any scream. My name is Margaret Hale, and I raised my daughter alone after her father decided family was an accessory he could take off when it no longer matched his ambitions. I worked 2 jobs, then 3, then one very good one, because I don't believe in staying small just because someone else is uncomfortable with growth. I didn't raise my voice when my daughter came home crying after her engagement dinner, whispering that his family thought our side was a little too much. I didn't flinch when invitations were suddenly limited, when venues changed without consulting me, when my name stopped appearing on planning emails even though the deposits were still coming out of my account. I watched patterns form. I listened. I waited. By the time he told me to watch the wedding online, I already knew what kind of man he was. What he didn't know was what kind of woman I am. That night I slept well. Not because I was at peace, but because my mind was already working through a checklist I had built over 40 years of surviving men who underestimate women they believe are finished contributing. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Inside were contracts, emails, favors, quiet agreements, and a web of professional relationships that had nothing to do with weddings and everything to do with accountability. You see, when you fund things, you leave fingerprints everywhere. Venues, caterers, licensing boards, donor lists, alumni committees, family trusts, business partnerships, political donors, nonprofit boards, all of them talk to each other in ways young men don't notice because they've never had to clean up their own messes. I didn't make threats. I didn't make dramatic calls. I made neutral calls, clarifying calls, compliance calls, calls that begin with, "I just wanted to confirm," and end with silence on the other end of the line. By mid-morning, his phone started ringing. At first he ignored it, then he stepped away from his groomsmen brunch, then his smile tightened, then he stopped answering altogether. Because the numbers weren't random. They were banks, they were law offices, they were senior partners, they were people who don't call unless something has shifted under your feet. He had believed the wedding was the finish line. He didn't realize it was the audit. When my daughter called me in tears asking what was happening, I told her the truth without poisoning her heart. I said, sometimes people reveal themselves right before they think they've won. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them face the consequences of their own confidence. She didn't understand yet. She would. By noon, the venue called him directly, not to cancel, to verify payment authority. By 1, the prenup lawyer requested a delay. By 2, his father received a call he couldn't pretend was spam. By 3, the live stream link he had so generously offered me to watch quietly from home stopped working entirely. I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't need anymore, and thought about all the women who were told to sit quietly, to accept being minimized for the sake of peace. Peace is expensive. Someone always pays for it. This time, it wasn't going to be me. And this was only the beginning. By the time the sun started sliding down the windows of my kitchen, the story outside had already fractured into versions, none of them flattering to him, all of them uncontrollable. He thought reputation was something you curated with photos and speeches and the right last name stitched onto a tuxedo. He didn't understand that reputation is actually a balance sheet of favors, debts, credibility, and memory is long when money and trust are involved. I didn't enjoy what came next, not in the way people imagine revenge being enjoyed. There was no thrill or smile or triumphant glass of wine. There was only a steady calm. The same calm I felt years earlier when I signed divorce papers without begging a man who had already packed his future without me. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang for the first time that day. It was his mother. Her voice trembled but stayed polite, the way women of her generation are trained to sound even when panic is clawing at their throat. She asked if there had been a misunderstanding, said they were confused, said no one meant to hurt me, said surely this could be resolved quietly. Quietly? I almost laughed. I told her the truth. Not all of it, just enough to be accurate. I said there was no misunderstanding, only delayed clarity. I said I wished them well. I ended the call. You'll notice a pattern here. I don't argue. I don't explain myself into exhaustion. I end calls. The next call came from a man whose number I hadn't seen in years, someone who had once needed a signature for me to keep a project afloat, someone who now oversaw a fund his future son-in-law relied on heavily. He didn't ask what was happening. He asked what I wanted. That's when you know power has shifted, when people stop asking questions and start asking instructions. I told him I wanted nothing done in anger and nothing rushed. I wanted processes followed, reviews completed, signatures verified, timelines respected. I wanted exactly what was written. No more, no less. He understood. He always did. That night, my daughter came over. She sat at the counter like she did when she was 16, legs swinging slightly, eyes searching my face for permission to be angry. She asked me if I hated him. I told her no. Hate requires energy, and I was conserving mine for something more useful. I told her this wasn't about punishing him. It was about protecting herself from a future that would have required her to disappear slowly to keep his ego comfortable. She cried then, not because of the wedding, but because she finally saw the pattern she had been excusing, the jokes at her expense, the decisions made without her, the way love had started to feel like an audition she kept passing but never winning. The next morning, the phones rang again, but this time they rang on my end. A vendor apologized for the confusion. A planner asked for guidance. A lawyer requested clarification. I gave none beyond what was necessary. I didn't insert myself back into a wedding I had been disinvited from. That was important. Power is not about reclaiming your seat at a table where you were insulted. It's about deciding whether the table still exists. Meanwhile, his world shrank. Meetings postponed, accounts flagged, invitations reworded, stories whispered. Men who had slapped him on the back days earlier suddenly became unavailable. Confidence, I've learned, is contagious, but so is doubt, and doubt spreads faster. By the end of the week, the wedding was still scheduled, technically, but everything around it felt hollow, like a stage after the audience has left. He called me late that night. Not angry, not apologetic, careful. That was new. He said he thought we should talk. I said I agreed. He asked when. I said after the wedding. Silence stretched between us, thick and revealing. He finally asked why I was doing this. I told him I wasn't doing anything. I was simply no longer protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. That's when he made his mistake. He said I was ruining his life. I corrected him. I said I was stepping out of it. And when I ended the call, I knew something he didn't yet understand. The wedding wasn't the climax of this story. It was the prologue to his unraveling. The day of the wedding arrived the way storms do when you've already boarded up the windows. Quietly, inevitably, carrying tension instead of surprise. I did not attend. I did not watch online either. I spent the morning exactly where I wanted to be. In my office, reviewing documents that had nothing to do with flowers or seating charts, and everything to do with permanence. People assume absence is weakness. They are wrong. Absence is a vacuum, and vacuums pull truth toward them whether anyone is ready or not. By late morning, my phone buzzed with updates I didn't ask for and didn't stop, because information flows toward power whether it's invited or not. A donor withdrew. A sponsor paused. A partner delayed. None of it dramatic. None of it loud. All of it cumulative. The kind of pressure that doesn't explode, but collapses inward. The ceremony itself went on, I'm told, because ceremonies almost always do, even when belief has already left the room. Smiles held too long. Applause came a beat late. Vows sounded practiced instead of promised. And somewhere between the exchange of rings and the clinking of glasses, he realized something was wrong in a way no rehearsal could fix. His phone vibrated during the reception, then again. Then again. He ignored it until he couldn't, stepped outside, took a call, then another, then stood very still, because stillness is what men do when they are trying to keep panic from showing on their face. That night, my daughter slept at my house. She didn't say much, neither did I. There was nothing left to explain. Some lessons land only after the noise stops. In the days that followed, the story reshaped itself publicly, the way all scandals do, softened for some audiences, sharpened for others. He blamed timing. He blamed misunderstandings. He blamed stress. He never blamed entitlement, because people like him never do. Privately, though, the calls became different. Apologies arrived without accountability. Offers arrived without humility. He wanted to meet. He wanted to clear the air. He wanted to move forward. Forward is a favorite word of people who want you to forget what just happened. I agreed to meet him, not because I needed closure, but because clarity is easier face to face. We met in a neutral place, not a restaurant, not an office, somewhere with no advantage built into the furniture. He looked older, not in years, but in posture. His confidence had learned gravity. He spoke first, thanked me for coming, said he wished things hadn't gotten so complicated. I let him talk. People always tell you who they are if you let them finish. He said he felt attacked. He said he felt blindsided. He never meant to hurt anyone. When he finally paused, waiting for my response, I gave him the simplest truth I could. I told him none of this was sudden, none of it was personal, and none of it was reversible. I told him I didn't act out of anger. I acted out of alignment. I told him I had watched him shrink my daughter in rooms where she should have expanded, and that once you see that clearly, you don't negotiate with it. You remove your support and let gravity do the rest. He asked if there was anything he could do. That question alone told me everything. He still believed relationships were transactions. I told him yes. I told him he could leave her alone. That was the last time we spoke. Months passed. The marriage did not age well. Public smiles continued while private fractures widened. My daughter rebuilt quietly, the way strong women do. Not loudly, not performatively, but with boundaries instead of apologies. And as for me, I returned to my life unchanged, except for one thing. People stopped mistaking my silence for softness. The numbers that rang his phone that morning never rang mine, because they never needed to. Power doesn't announce itself. It simply withdraws support and lets the truth stand on its own. And if there's one thing I know for certain now, it's this. When someone tells you to watch your own erasure from a distance, the most powerful response is to make sure the world sees exactly who handed you the screen. Time has a way of finishing stories people think they escaped. A year passed, then another, and the noise around his name softened the way applause always does when there's nothing new to clap for. The marriage survived on paper longer than it survived in truth, because paperwork is patient even when people are not. My daughter moved cities, not to run, but to breathe, and in that space, she grew into herself without asking permission, built a life that didn't require shrinking, laughing more easily, sleeping more deeply, choosing men who listened when she spoke instead of translating her words into inconveniences. I watched from a respectful distance, the way you do when your job is finished but your love is permanent. As for him, consequences didn't arrive all at once. They arrived the way rust does, quietly, structurally, ruining things from the inside while the surface still pretends to shine. Projects dried up, invitations slowed. The same people who once defended him with enthusiasm now spoke about him with careful neutrality. And neutrality, I've learned, is professional exile. One afternoon, years later, I ran into someone who mentioned his name casually, the way you mention a former coworker you barely remember. And in that moment, I knew the story had truly ended. Not with fireworks, not with public humiliation, but with irrelevance. That is the ending people like him fear most. Not punishment, not loss, but being unnecessary to the future they thought they owned. He never called again. He never apologized properly. He never understood. And that's fine. Closure is a luxury, not a requirement. What mattered is that my daughter learned early what it costs to tolerate disrespect disguised as tradition, and what it rewards to walk away before your spirit starts negotiating for space. People still ask me sometimes if I regret not saying more that day, not fighting harder, not demanding my seat back. I tell them no. Because the truth is, when someone tells you to watch your worth from a distance, the most devastating answer is to make sure they are the ones who end up alone with the screen, replaying the moment they mistook grace for weakness and silence for surrender.